Hi, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this week's construction clinic. It's great to see so many familiar names on the session today, so you'll be no stranger to the format. We'll start with a very brief housekeeping presentation, an overview of the ICCP for those who haven't heard of us before, and then we'll get into today's questions. So on your screen, you should have a control panel. There's not too much you need to be aware of, except this hand icon here. If you have any issues with audio today, please raise your hand. We'll try and help. We ourselves have had a few issues with connectivity. So if videos are pixelated or the audio is not quite tracking right, bear with it for a couple of minutes because it will normally set itself straight. But if it doesn't, raise your hand, let me know, and we'll try and get you sorted. Obviously, the focus today is questions, so you should also see on your your control panel, you have a question box. So feel free to send your questions through there, and I'll field them across to Andy and Mark. Okay, so the ICCP, what is it? Well, we are a professional members organisation and we recognise those with skills, qualifications and expertise in the professional management of construction claims. We have three objectives, and those are to establish international professional standards for the management of claims, to give recognition to those who have gained the appropriate knowledge and experience in the management of claims, and also to help and educate those who would like to gain that experience. So membership, we offer 3 levels of individual membership. Those are associate member and fellow, and entry at any of those levels would entitle you to use that designation after your name, so MICCP, for example. All levels come with a certain set of prerequisites which must be met to gain entry, if you like, to the Institute. I'm not going to go into the detail, but all of the information is up on the ICCP website. So if you like the sound of the Institute and you would like to explore membership, take a look at the website, and you can always get in touch with myself if you have any questions. So the clinics today, we're actually delivering these in partnership with Claims Class, who is the ICCP training partner. There was a natural synergy between the two organisations. Claims Class teaches the skills that you need to manage construction claims effectively, and of course the ICCP recognises professionals with that skill set. So Claims Class offer a variety of courses. The topics are on your screen there, and they are delivered in online courses, so basic, intermediate and premium levels. They also offer in-house training for companies, and in a similar way to the ICCP, they would produce regular articles and technical information on contracts and claims. So check out Claims Class. At the moment, they're offering 20% saving on all of the online courses. So again, if you're at home or been furloughed and you have some time on your hands, now could be a good time to get those skills that you've been wanting to build. So if you'd like to learn more about the ICCP, our details are up on your screens there. Visit our website. You can contact me directly. If you have questions specific to membership, my colleague Jennifer deals with those. So drop the membership email address a line, and we'd be happy to have a chat with you. Okay, so today's clinic, we're delighted to welcome Andy Hewitt back. Andy's our Executive Officer, and we've also got Mark Watson, who is a new member of the steering committee appointed by members in January this year. So I'm now going to hand over to Andy, and he's going to kick things off for us today with the first questions.
Right, thank you, Nina, and welcome everybody. Nina tells me that we've got a now then, what's happened to my screen? Anyway, hopefully you can see me. Nina tells me we've got quite a good attendee this afternoon, so around about 100 people. So we're really pleased that the ICCP is finding or providing something useful, particularly in this this situation where a lot of people are working at home. They are, as Nina says, sort of laid off, maybe got time on the hands. So we're more than happy to help. So I've got a few questions which I'll go through, which people have pre-submitted, and then I'll hand over to Mark. We've divided these up between us in accordance with our particular specialities and expertise. So the first one is from Akira Shiroya. Thank you, Akira. One of our claims class students, actually. And the question is, I have a query on the engineer's duties under the FIDIC contract. When the engineer administers a contract in civil law jurisdictions to make a determination for claims, what is the best way to deal with such rules of the common law as a time bar for notices and prevention principles? Now, for those of you who are maybe not familiar with civil law or not familiar with the FIDIC contracts, let me give you a bit of a background. The FIDIC contracts have a lot of very stringent requirements for the contractor to submit notices, and say very, very clearly and equivocally that if the contractor doesn't submit the notices within the time frame, he is not entitled to anything. Now, under common law jurisdictions, if that's what you've signed up into and when you've signed the contract, that is exactly what happens. Don't submit your notice, you can't have anything, because that's what you've agreed to. Common law is very light in this respect. In civil law, however, it's not quite as black and white as that, and it requires the parties to treat each other fairly, not to take undue advantage of one another, and in some jurisdictions that a just claim can never expire. So in my mind, that doesn't really fit too comfortably with the FIDIC principles of if you don't submit your notice, you can't have anything. And many times I've been in the position of the engineer, and we've had to look at an issue, particularly with the contractor's claims, and really advise the engineer what to do. It's one of our specialities as consultants. And the way I always approach this, even when I've been the engineer myself, is to look at things fairly and reasonably. And can we time bar the contractor? Well, I'm not going to say yes, and I'm not going to say no. What I'm going to do is give you a bit of a lawyer's answer and say it depends. And very, very quickly, I'll give you a couple of examples. Number one example, the employer, the engineer, instructs the contractor to build 2 new stories on a building. The contractor doesn't submit a notice, and then the engineer rejects his claim for an extension of time and additional payment because he didn't send a piece of paper in. When it's pretty obvious to anybody, the contractor needs more time and more money to build 2 extra floors on a building. That's one side of the coin. The other side of the coin is the engineer instructs the contractor that he wants a piece of equipment painting red instead of blue. And the contractor doesn't tell the engineer that that piece of equipment's already been manufactured in Germany. It's on a ship, and still without telling the engineer, he lands it at the home country, puts it back on a ship, sends it to the factory, gets it painted whatever colour I said, red, puts it back on a ship, brings it back to the site. The project is now 3 months delayed because it's a vital piece of equipment, and he hands the engineer a claim for $500,000 for painting the piece of equipment from blue to red. Now that's the other side of the coin. And by not giving a notice, the engineer and the employer have then been prevented from mitigating the circumstances. Oh, thanks for telling me, Mr. Contractor. Didn't know that it had already been painted blue and it was on a ship. Let's wait until it gets to site and let's paint it there. A couple of $100 instead of $500,000. So you see the difference. And I think the engineer's got a duty when determining claims to take into account the law which is applicable to the project. So if you know that civil law will be applied, and you know that time bars are not going to be applicable in some circumstances, you have to take the law into account when you are coming with your determination. But of course, just to finish off, I'll say this, I'm sick and tired of repeating this over the past 30 years. The way to avoid any of this, contractors, is just make sure you get your notices submitted on time. It takes an hour to write a notice and send it to the engineer, the architect, whoever, and it can take many, 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 many expensive hours to try and get you out of your problem when you've caused it by not spending that hour and sending your notice. So I hope that helps, Akira. Right, going on to Dinushika, I hope I've pronounced that correctly, who was actually submitted one question in 4 parts. And again, it's to do with FIDIC, and it's an EPC turnkey contract, so I'm guessing it's the Silver Book. And unsurprisingly, it relates to force majeure and, of course, COVID. And again, I'll try and explain things, what FIDIC says for those of you who are not familiar with the conditions of contract. FIDIC includes a definition of force majeure, firstly, and I will read these out because it's quite similar to other forms of contract. It's got to be beyond the party's control. It couldn't have been reasonably provided for before entering into the contract, which had arisen, the party could not have reasonably have avoided it or overcome it, and it doesn't have to be, or has to be, not something that's substantially attributable to the other party. So for it to be considered as force majeure, it's got to tick all those 4 boxes. And in fact, if we think about COVID-19, it does tick all those boxes. FIDIC then goes on to give even more qualification and gives a list of 5 things and says, force majeure may include, but is not limited to, exceptional events or circumstances of the kind listed below. And without going into the details, none of the items listed, which include war, hostilities, rebellion, terrorism, riot, commotion, munitions of war, or natural catastrophes, can really said to apply to COVID-19. So that's the background, and that's why FIDIC is a little bit grey. So Dinushika's question is, does it fulfill the criteria from A to D? Yes, it does. That's the first list of it. Hence, is it possible the cost claim is only limited, and for costs, it's got an even stronger qualification. There are certain items that say that it is, you can claim costs for, and they qualify that of those items, some of them have got to occur in the country of the project. So because FIDIC specifically limits the costs to the stated criteria, they have to occur in the country. So if, for example, you are having plant and materials manufactured in China and your project is in Germany, well, they didn't, the effects of the COVID-19, which affected the plant and materials that have been manufactured, didn't occur in Germany. Sorry, but you can't claim costs. So second part of the question, once patients, and I assume that Dinushka means that people who have contracted the disease are identified in the country where we execute our project, then wouldn't this be in the country? Well, yes, it would. But now the effect has moved from China, where we're having things manufactured, to the country where we need to provide labour to the project. These people have been affected by the disease, or in some cases, projects have been suspended because there has been an outbreak discovered. In some countries, the law of the country, the country has imposed a work embargo or a lockdown. Well, yes, these have occurred in the country, so that if we can prove that COVID-19 is force majeure, there's a chance that you can claim costs. We then go on to say, currently our project has been suspended by the employer because of COVID-19. In this situation, is it correct that we quote both clause 8.8 suspension of work and 8.9 consequences of suspension? Now, I would say that if the employer has, for whatever reason, suspended the work on the project, your claim is not for force majeure, it's for suspension, which is dealt with in an entirely different clause in FIDIC. And you will be entitled to an extension of time, and you will be entitled to your costs incurred through the suspension. So demobilisation, remobilisation, and any things that you can't cancel, such as guarantees, bonds, insurances, for the period of the suspension. And lastly, fairly typically, the employer actually didn't give an official notice of suspension. It just told the contractor to suspend. Dinushka says that we wrote to the employer sort of confirming the construction and is asking my opinion, did we do the right thing? Well, I would have said that if your letter confirmed the verbal instruction to suspend the works and said, this is in accordance with clause 8.8, a notice to suspend, you've removed any doubt and any chance of the employer coming back later and said, well, I didn't really mean that you were going to suspend. I just wanted you to do that. And finally, ensure that once you've qualified and you've confirmed to the employer that you send all the notices that the contract requires you to submit. And this is FIDIC. So make sure that you send a notice that you're incurring delay and suffering delay and incurring costs, and just comply with the notice requirements. So I hope that answers that question. And I think it's probably, I am sorry, a quick one from Simon Rowlands, who seems to be a big fan of our clinics. Very quick one. If under FIDIC, again, if the contractor receives an engineer's instruction under subclause 3.3, which is the clause that entitles the engineer to give instructions to the contractor, which he considers to be a variation under clause 13, is there a time limit by which it should notify the engineer? A very common problem. Engineers give you instructions, they may issue revised drawings, they may tell you to do something, they may give you comments on your shop drawings or your submittals. They don't acknowledge that it's a variation, and they expect you to do it as a contractor without charging any additional money if you're on a lump sum project. If in any doubt, if you think it's a variation, you must send a clause 20 notice. Dear Mr. Engineer, we consider this instruction gives us entitlement to a delay if it's going to cause a delay or additional payment, and you must get it in within the 28 days. Otherwise, we've got to go all into the arguments about time bar and all the rest of it. And I've already said enough about that, so I'm going to keep quiet. And at this point, to give Mark a chance and other people who've submitted questions, I'm going to hand over to Mark. So thank you very much, and I hope this has been useful.
Thank you, Andy. Good afternoon, everybody. The first question I'll be responding to is a question received from Nuno Paulo. And the question is, in the FIDIC Yellow Book 1999 edition, clause 17.3 foresees one of the employee's risks as any operation of forces of nature. This might be associated with the current pandemic, COVID-19, that is a force of nature. But in the FIDIC Yellow Book, the 2017 edition, the clause for employers' risks do not exist. So my question is, does FIDIC 2017 override all contracts made before 2017? You know, the 2017 edition of the FIDIC forms of contract do not override any of the previous editions of the FIDIC standard form contracts. And the reason is that each edition of the FIDIC contract is by itself a separate and independent contract. So therefore, it will not override any previous editions. Our second question is from Ahmed Sadek. And Ahmed has asked the question is, we are using the FIDIC Red Book 1999. Consequently, coronavirus considering a force majeure, but the site still working as fast, but affected a little bit. So how can contractors submit an EOT claim or not entitled? If I understand it correctly, the contractor is still progressing the works, although at a much slower rate than what he planned to progress the works under his 8.3 program. If this is correct, then your question and the question from Faisal Momina is very similar, and I'll respond to those simultaneously. Faisal's question is, if a contract is signed after the commencement of COVID-19 pandemic, would you agree that disruption caused would not be considered force majeure? In response to both those questions, the disruption or the rate of progress changes would not be considered a force majeure. Therefore, you would not raise your EOT claim under subclause 19.4, which relates to the consequences of force majeure. These rate of progress issues, we will refer to the provisions of subclause 8.6. Now, subclause 8.6 has got two circumstances. The first circumstance relates to where your actual progress is going to delay completion of the works. And the second circumstance relates to where your actual progress is less than your planned progress under your 8.3 program. In both those circumstances, you can raise your claim for extension of time completion under subclause 8.4. And specifically because this deals with the COVID-19 pandemic, I would raise it under 8.4E, because under the COVID-19 limitations, you might be required to have less people on site because of the social distancing issue. In South Africa, our construction sites resume on Friday. However, we can only bring back a third of the people. Therefore, in those circumstances, my rate of progress will be less. And also, subclause 8.4 provides a clause that says is or will be delayed. Now, where your rate of progress delays completion, that falls under the first category, is delayed. Where your rate of progress is less than your planned progress, it could potentially delay in the future your works. However, if you do not raise your EOT claim under 8.4, you run two risks. The first risk is you could run into a time bar scenario. And the second risk is that the engineer, when he sees that your rate of progress is less than what you planned under your 8.3 program, can instruct you to provide additional resources to accelerate and provide additional goods to meet or to catch up to your progress plan under the 8.3. Therefore, it is very important that under these circumstances, your claim is worded under 8.4 and you submit those notices timelessly. My third question is from Lahiru. Lahiru asks, if a party submits notice of dissatisfaction, the DAB's decision does not become final and binding. Therefore, is this party entitled to withhold any due payments until the dispute is finally resolved through arbitration? And he references the FIDIC Red Book, the 1995 edition. Lahiru, in the circumstances where a party raises a notice of dissatisfaction under subclause 20.4, the DAB's decision will still be binding on both parties. And the catch word phrase is that unless or until it is revised in an arbitral award. So how you read it is that unless the DAB's decision is revised in an arbitral award, it will still become binding. Until it is revised in an arbitral award, the DAB decision will still be binding. Therefore, you cannot withhold any payments. And this we often refer to as rough justice. That means you pay now, dispute later. Okay. My final question is from Moses Lawrence. And the question is, assume there was a construction contract, be it signed under FIDIC conditions or else. Now, in the course of implementing the contract, there was a delay, and the delay was caused by the employer due to design changes. Now, down the line, the contract came up with a claim head that he is entitled for compensation on overhead costs due to benefits paid to employed project superintendents, foremen, field engineers, etc. This matter was referred to the adjudicator for him to decide. The adjudicator is coming up with an argument that the contractor has to produce evidence to show that contract's employees were on site all the time the project was delayed for the claim head to be valid and with merit. My question is the line of argument by the adjudicator correct? Now, I'm going to respond to this question under two separate contracts. But what is important to realize most is that the answer herein lies and is dependent upon the adjudication clauses provided under the specific contract you're working under. So if I refer to the 99 edition of the FIDIC Red and Yellow Books, subclause 20.4, specifically paragraph 3, which provides for that the adjudicator or the DAB can request additional information that will assist him or them in making a decision. So under the subclause 20.4, the adjudicator or the DAB has got the right to ask for additional information. Similarly, under the NEC dispute resolution clause W1.35, the adjudicator may request the party to provide additional information, and the adjudicator can take the initiative to ascertain the facts linked to the dispute. That means that the adjudicator can take initiative to request additional information, to ask more probing questions. So under these two contracts, the adjudicator or the DAB can request additional information. The worrying matter here issue is that as a contractor, you have an obligation to retain or keep records that substantiate your actual claim and submit that with your claim. What this tells me is that if your claim was not properly substantiated, and two, that your claim, the cause and effect of the claim was not properly set out. And therefore, if you do not provide information, the adjudicator can proceed on the basis that this information doesn't exist, and his decision can be detrimental to the contractor. So therefore, it's important that you retain the correct information that substantiates your claim. And that is my final question. Nina, back to you, Nina.
Thanks, Mark, and thanks, Andy. Nice to see we got through the pre-submitted questions today. Normally that ends up being all we have time for. We've got a few minutes left, so I'm going to go across to live questions. We have a question from Palani. If the employer has instructed the contractor to reduce site manpower due to cases of coronavirus infection, who would bear the expenses, and would that be a case of force majeure?
Well, Mark, shall I take this one?
Please, Andy.
Well, again, if the employer's instructed the contractor to do something, well, the employer's sort of taking the responsibility for it. So whether it's force majeure, as I said in my question to the answer to the question that was raised earlier, not quite sure. But Mark made a very good point that if we're talking about FIDIC, whilst force majeure might be grey and not terribly black and white, there is a very strong case for an extension of time under clause 8.4, which allows an extension of time as a result of epidemic, obviously qualifies, or governmental action. So if the employer instructed the contractor to reduce the personnel on site for health and safety reasons, I've got to applaud that employer for taking that step. And obviously the contractor can't proceed at the same pace, it's going to cause a delay. So definitely I think there is a case there for disruption if we've only got 50% of people on site, theoretically we could only proceed at half pace. So that would lead to a delay. So I hope that answers the question.
And a follow-up question from Polani. If government officials have been bribed in order to process some statutory approvals, would that be a circumstance which would allow you to claim?
Did you say bribed, as in given money to?
I would assume so. There's no details. It's just if there's a case of bribery to government officials to process statutory approvals, would that be something that leads to a claim situation?
I'm not quite sure what the claim situation would be, but if we can prove that either party, either the employer or the contractor, I don't know who's doing the bribing here, has committed acts like that, that is a reason to terminate the contract on immediate notice. So if you've been caught out committing acts of bribery or such like, you're in danger of having the contract terminated.
Okay, I think we've got time for one more.
To add to that, if anybody's thinking that the bribes that you've paid out to people can be claimed as costs, think again.
Question from Joseph Salama. The contract is FIDIC Red Book 1999. The extension of time clause has been amended to say that where there are concurrent delays, the contractor is not eligible for an extension of time for completion. But the law is civil code, and the law states that when the contractor is delayed for reasons beyond their control, it should be compensated in time and cost. So what do you follow in this case? Do you follow the contract or do you follow the law?
Mark, shall I take this one?
Please, that's more of a contract question than the delay question.
Yeah, happy to take that one. Well, first of all, that the law will always supersede the contract. And I've come across contracts where employers have tried to protect themselves by including such a clause. And I think, bearing in mind that we're not lawyers, I think that there's a very good argument that if the employer delays the project and the contractor delays also, the employer has got to give an extension of time to the extent that his delay affected the completion date and cannot deduct delay penalties. So that's my take on that. And again, it's employers trying to shift the risk away from themselves onto the contractor. And very often these sort of things just end up being a big mess, and they very often are not in accordance with the law to which the contract is subject. So that's my take on that one, but I must stress that that is not a legal opinion.
Okay, that's all we've got time for today. Anybody who submitted questions that we've not gotten around to, they'll be added to a rolling list for next week. So make sure you join us next week and they'll be top of the list. Just a couple of notes. Everybody, whether you register and attend or register and don't manage to attend live, you'll always receive the recordings in a follow-up email. If there's past clinics that you'd like to have a look at, all of those recordings are up on the ICCP website. Just go to the homepage, you'll see a webinar link at the top. All of the construction clinics are up there, and the public webinar series, which we ran earlier this year. It was a series of 6 one-hour webinars, all on different topics, contracts and claims related. So if you've not seen those, do check those out. For any members online today, check your members area. We've put a ton of content in that's been released over the past few weeks in relation to COVID-19, issues on projects, legal opinions and all sorts, including a paper which we've produced all about FIDIC and the COVID-19 situation. So have a look at that. And that's it from us today. Thank you very much for joining. Thank you to Andy and Mark for your time, and we look forward to seeing you again next week.
Okay,
Thank you
thank
much.
you.
Bye-bye.